So they've kind of left and led Britain down a kind of a disastrous course, it sounds like. And that's had major impacts on everyday citizens. And I guess part of my question as well is, I mean, we're kind of going through quite a story here, because in order to understand Great Britain today, we've got to understand that this lead up is the country aging? Is its demographics declining, like in terms of its birth rate? And is that one of the reasons behind this policy of mass migration that's driving this kind of decision making?
The country is aging, and you're right. That is certainly, one of the arguments that pro-migration people make is that we need workers to fill jobs that we just simply don't have the labor, the domestic labor to fill. But my question is, are these workers, are these migrants, are they not going to go old? Are they not going to grow old? Are they not going to require pensions? Are they not going to require the NHS? Are they not going to require services, infrastructure, and welfare, just as native British people do? This is just simply delaying the problem. Until politicians take the issue of collapsing fertility rates seriously, then this problem will only continue. And I think migrants are making it worse. As we've seen today, as I said, £150,000 per migrant is what it costs the British taxpayer for these low-skilled people. So they are an incredible burden on our economy. And it's incredibly short-sighted to think that you can fill this labour gap with migrants. Again, it's a legacy of the Conservative government.
Indeed. So within this context, we arrived to when there was a national election. We know that under the Labour government, we have the new Prime Minister, Keir Starmer. Can you help us understand then what were the key issues in the election and how it panned out that England, the UK, elected a Labour government?
What happened was the Conservatives lost their voters. They lost their support for all of the reasons I've told you, for their betrayal on immigration, for their betrayal on the economy. People have just decided we've had enough of the Conservative Party. And the Labour voters voted as they always do in the last few elections. They simply voted again for the Labour Party. And it was enough this time, because of the collapse of the Conservative vote, to win a landslide majority.
Isn't that fascinating? So would it be fair to say that this last election then is certainly not a full national mandate, but a lot of the voters were protesting the state of where they were and just wanted a change desperately because they were so fed up with where they're at?
I think we got to a point where people just despised the Conservatives and didn't believe a word that they said. When they make all these promises and you go back on them, eventually people are going to start to understand that, you are betraying us on those conservative principles. And there's a real anger, a visceral anger amongst genuinely conservative people in Britain that on so many of these issues, particularly on migration, which is an issue that is very difficult to reverse. You can cut taxes, you can cut regulations, you can cut back the big state. All of these reforms quite, fairly easily once you're re-elected. Once you import millions of migrants into the country, they're essentially there to stay. It's very difficult to get rid of them or to change that demographic makeup of the country. So the sense of betrayal is huge. The emotions against the Conservatives from their own voters was incredible. And just, you'd have lifelong people who always voting the Conservative Party saying, no, I will never vote for you. You have totally betrayed my trust.
Okay, so that's a profound insight then into the state of UK politics, is that the Conservative Party may be irreparably harmed if it can recover at all. So we're in a situation now where we do have a Labour government. What would be the core of their policy initiatives from your perspective?
Well, what we've seen so far has been utter disaster and chaos. They've let out more than 1,000 prisoners. Earlier, I think
1,000 prisoners?
More than 1,000 prisoners from our prisons early, because they said the prisons were overcrowded and we need the capacity to fill those prisons with new criminals who, by the way, some of them are people who have been arrested and charged and sentenced for posting things on Facebook that the government found offensive. Recently,
Wait
in
a
the
sec.
UK,
You're saying so there's people now online, and we'll certainly get into this more as the world of online censorship that this government has introduced now. They're starting to put those parties in jail while letting existing prisoners go out of the prison to make room for them.
they are letting out people who have serious convictions, whether it's sexual assault, domestic abuse, and so on, early. Most of these prisoners have only served 40% of their sentences,
My, oh my.
to then put in prison, which is what we saw over the recent riots in the UK, and we can talk a bit about that. People who were posting offensive things about those riots in the UK, hate speech, and so on. And by the way, I'm not defending what these people posted on Facebook. Some of these posts were pretty abhorrent, talking about burning migrants and things like that. But whether you should put them in prison, I think, is another matter. And that is complete online censorship. We used to be a country where we had freedom of speech. You had the right to be offensive, the right to say outrageous things. And in one case, a woman was arrested for posting incorrect information on social media. That's what the police explicitly said. We have now arrested a woman who posted something incorrect included incorrect, false information online. Now, if that's not an authoritarian state, I don't know what is. So the sort of vision we've had from the Labour Party so far has been letting out criminals, replacing those criminals in prisons with people who have posted stuff on Facebook, clamping down on freedom of speech, and generally having a fairly soft approach towards things like migration and just ordinary crime.
No, fascinating. And the reference to the power of special interests to be able to, in effect, hijack the interests of a nation. In Canada, we certainly look up to the grand traditions of the UK, and it's an incredible country, the United Kingdom, and so it's a bit sad to hear that's almost a trajectory of decline. Now, those are my words, but is that kind of the self-awareness of the narrative with many citizens, that they feel that they're on a nation of decline?
Well, Keir Starmer is explicitly saying that things are going to get worse before they get better. He says he has to make tough decisions. So I think many people in the UK are accepting what Keir Starmer is saying. Things are going to get worse. And I think there's a huge amount of depression, particularly on the Conservative side of things, that we are heading into. We've been through managed decline ever since the end of the empire. And we are that's kind of accelerating under Labour. It got worse under the Conservatives. And only until the Conservative Party or the Reform Party or a conservative movement on the right recognizes, that it's betrayed, the Conservative Party betrayed its conservative principles, particularly on issues like migration, there won't be any hope until that happens, I don't think. I think the Conservatives really need to sort themselves out. They need to understand why they lost so badly. And another major problem we have in the UK, particularly, again, from a Conservative perspective, is that many of these institutions, particularly government institutions, have been totally captured by the left. These institutions are meant to be politically impartial, but they are not. And it's how Conservative prime ministers and future governments can enact Conservative policies without being frustrated by these individuals who work in government. That's a huge challenge. And that's not something, it sounds easy, just pass these laws and things are going to happen. No. It's a huge challenge for future Conservative administrations to understand how the state works, to understand how the levers of power are pulled and where power lies. And that's something, I think, another huge kind of disadvantage or a weakness of the Conservatives recently has been they just do not understand how power works in Britain today.
Okay, so I think that's a very interesting insight, Stephen. And I know that, I certainly respect you very much as a journalist. And you've examined this very carefully, is the changing health, if you will, of institutions, and how this new way of thinking has really infected so many institutions, whether it's the media, the civil service in the UK. I mean, the list goes on and on, education. Um, how have you observed, for example, in the civil service, the changing narratives that are really coming from really a Marxist perspective?
The civil service in the UK has been largely captured by people obsessed with DEI, with diversity, equality, and inclusion. And that's something I've been reporting on for many years now. They were also removing Christianity from Acts of Remembrance, on Remembrance Day, on Armistice Day, Remembrance Sunday, and so on, to be more inclusive of other religions like Muslims and Islam and so on. And this shows that even under a Conservative administration, civil servants are wasting time, public resources on diversity meetings constantly. It's a huge distraction from their day jobs. They are investing massive amounts of money in diversity officers, public money. So the Conservatives, as I said, they do not understand how to pull the levers of state, they don't understand where power lies. And by passively funding tens of millions of pounds, maybe even more than that, to their ideological enemies in these charities, NGOs, and so on, it just shows how utterly incompetent they were as administrators. Okay. So yes, the civil service.
This is fascinating. So as we look to the UK, are you seeing definite signs or green shoots of hope and renewal? I think of, for instance, in the last election, and you just referenced this, is the emergence of Nigel Farage on the domestic scene in the UK. Is his leadership in that party, can you help explain what that's about? And is that a sign of renewal?
I think, if you're a British Conservative voter, having a reform there is a hope. They won 5 members of Parliament. And I think some of their members of Parliament, people like Richard Tice, he's the deputy leader of Reform, are being very effective, asking good questions of Keir Starmer, trying to hold Labour to account. So certainly, there is some hope for British Conservatives, I think, with Nigel Farage's Reform Party. But again, the question is, do they understand how the levers of power worked? If Nigel became Prime Minister tomorrow, would he be able to govern effectively? It's a really important question that Reform needs to be asking themselves. And they also need to professionalize as a party. They need to get more activists. They've got problems in terms of campaigning locally. They need a lot more money. Again, as I said before, it's very difficult for small parties in Britain under the electoral system to succeed. So if they are going to succeed in the long term, they need to hope that the Conservatives fail. And I think they've got a lot of room to hope there. And they need to build up their own resources. They need to professionalize. They need to understand how to win these elections to be effective in the future. So I think there is some hope for British Conservatives. Also, by the way, I say everything that I've said in this interview, but, if you're an ordinary person living in a little village somewhere in England, of which there are many, many people, millions of people, life isn't terrible. It's still a beautiful nation with a great history. You can walk around and see fantastic views of churches, architectural beauty, castles. It's a fantastic place to be, fantastic place to live. So, there's some, I don't want to be too sort of doomer like in my rhetoric.
Indeed.
Life can still go on, still be pretty good, despite all of the things that the elites and the governments are doing.
Very good. Well, look, Stephen Edginton, the U.S. correspondent from GB News, I want to thank you so much for joining us for this far-reaching discussion about the state of the UK, and wish you all the very best in your work.
Thank you, David. Appreciate your time as well. Appreciate you having me on.
Without open discussion and debate, you're not thinking, nor are you free. Comment below. We'd love for you to join the conversation.